Everyone, it's me again. Welcome back. This week we're exploring Charles Dickens's characters Fred and Fezziwig and their role in Scrooge's redemption. Before we begin, we've got to consider the authorial intention and the reasoning behind the construction of these characters. So, what is Fred and Fezziwig's purpose within the novella? So both characters, Fred and Fezziwig, are used by Dickens to reveal the importance of generosity, empathy and kindness. Fezziwig is used to show how within Victorian society, benevolent capitalism not only has a place, but also has a positive impact on a range of people. Whereas Fred is used to highlight the importance of being generous with your time and generous with your kindness. Dickens uses Fred as a very reliable and consistent character throughout the novella because he maintains an open heart and jovial nature, and it reveals the positive impact that loving relationships can have on someone. Both characters enact a physical change within Scrooge as he slowly transforms from an isolated and barbed character, which means like spiky characteristics, to someone who is joyful and reflective. So, both of these characters play a huge role on Scrooge's redemption, and they are almost like role models for Scrooge to enact his change. Okay, so the first character we're going to look at is Fred, and Fred is Scrooge's nephew. Now, as a construct, Fred is Scrooge's foil. Now, a foil is a character who contrasts with another character, and we obviously see that Fred is the antithesis to Scrooge, okay? Especially Scrooge's introduction, that isolated, miserly character, whereas Fred is introduced to us as this really jovial, warm-hearted individual. This extract is taken from the beginning of the novella, and it's the conversation between Fred and Scrooge, and we're going to look at more closely the description of Fred. Okay, so the first quotation that we're going to look at in this extract is, "He had so heated himself with the rapid walking in the fog and the frost." Now, here we can see that Fred exudes warmth and positivity, which is a direct contrast to the description of Scrooge, who is described as carrying a frosty rime upon his head and carrying his own low temperature. Where Scrooge is the embodiment of cold and frost, Dickens is using Fred to reveal the importance of empathy and kindness here. The next one we want to look at is when Fred is described as being all in a glow. Okay, and what we can see here is that Fred's kindness and warmth is manifesting into light, okay, which highlights how Dickens views benevolence as something that is a beacon of hope within society, okay. He's using Fred's character to reinforce the importance of compassion within humanity. I would also comment on the fact that this imagery of light is essential to the journey of Scrooge in the novella, okay? Because you not only have the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present, and Fezziwig and Fred, who all emit some form of light, okay? It's almost as we can see as a reader that Scrooge is being guided on this path to enlightenment, which is obviously then essential to Scrooge's change in attitude at the very end of the novella. Okay, and the last quotation for Fred's description that I want to look at is the description of his eyes. So his eyes are described as being a sparkling, okay? As I mentioned in my video about Jacob Marley, in literature, eyes are considered as windows to the soul. Marley's eyes are described as being death cold, which limits Scrooge to recognise his old friend in death, and would have been very frightening and isolating for Scrooge. Whereas Fred's eyes are sparkling, okay, which perhaps indicates that Fred's soul is inherently empathetic and kind, which shines through his eyes. And it's not only an insight into the type of society Dickens wanted to inspire, but it's also a clear indication that Fred is determined to open his heart to his unfeeling uncle. A further comparison that we could make is the description of Scrooge's eyes, which are at the beginning of the novella described as being red, which implies that due to his meanness and his isolation, Scrooge is almost sinful, in contrast to the morality that Fred clearly radiates. Next moment that we're going to look at is when the ghost of Christmas Present takes Scrooge to view Fred's Christmas party. Now, this whole scene is filled with laughter, dancing, conversation. There's a big group of people. The scene is very warm, and there's this moment where Fred and his wife are talking about Scrooge. Okay, Fred's wife is very clear on the matter that she can't stand Scrooge, but Fred refuses to partake in that conversation, and he maintains that very empathetic attitude towards his uncle. We know that Fred, has this amazing capacity for laughter and seeing sort of the positive side of life. Okay, and he describes his uncle as being a comical old fellow. Okay, and what this shows us is that Fred's positivity means that he's completely resistant to Scrooge's cruelty and neglect. He sees Scrooge as something to find humour in rather than someone to be feared. Fred's life is filled with positivity, warmth and affection, so he's unaffected by Scrooge's behaviour. Okay? Fred literally states that Scrooge's offences carry their own punishment. So Scrooge's offences in his nephew's eyes are his isolation, okay, and his refusal to build and form a relationship with Fred, okay, and the punishment for that is that lack of love that Scrooge lives, and the isolation that he maintains in his life. Whereas because Fred's life is filled with that positivity and affection that he is rewarded in life. Okay, so he doesn't view Scrooge as a threat. I think it's more almost was shown by Dickens that Fred's disappointed, but obviously he has this determination to form that relationship with his uncle. And here what Dickens is doing is he's reinforcing the importance of familial relationships and how familial relationships have such a benefit on someone's character, okay? Because Fred, despite the lack of relationship with his uncle, has many other positive relationships with other people, his wife, his friends, okay? And that's exuded through Fred's own positivity. He doesn't need the money to be happy. He needs the love and the affection to be happy. We then see a moment where Fred discusses Scrooge's wealth, and he's very critical of Scrooge and what he does with his wealth. Okay, he says his wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. Okay, now this is Dickens's primary message within the novella, and it's being voiced by Fred, but the primary message is exhibited by Fred Fezziwig. That's the difference. Okay, we see Fred talk about this primary message of using wealth to benefit others in society and being charitable, and we see Fezziwig actually enact that generosity. Okay, so we see it in two different ways, and it's this idea that for Dickens, this is his fundamental belief that being charitable with money and time will create a just society. So we see that Fred extends invitations to Scrooge to spend Christmas with him, and we know that this has been happening year in, year out. So for Fred, he's generous with his time and his love and his affection, and then we see Fezziwig is also generous with time, but we also see Fezziwig is generous with his own wealth and benefits the people who work for him and other members of society. To explore Fezziwig and how he is shown to be the model of benevolence, just to remind you, benevolence means kindness, okay? We see that Dickens spends lots of time describing Fezziwig, okay? And we see that Fezziwig is this, again, just like Fred, this positive role model within society. This is what Dickens is showing his readers, the importance of who and what you should be. So he describes Fezziwig as laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence. Really popular quotation to explore. Okay, the bit I'd like to zoom in on is the organ of benevolence. Okay, now an organ is biologically a collection of tissues that form a functional unit, specialised to perform a particular function. Okay, I would also look at an organ as being something that is central. Okay, whether it's central to a body or it's central within society. Now, we see in the novella that Fezziwig's central desire is his desire to do good to others. Okay, and what we can look at here is that the organ, Dickens is implying that having people like Fezziwig within our society, it's a fundamental part of making sure that the society functions well. Okay, without this organ, society will become corrupted or broken down because it can't function without the positivity, being charitable and benevolent. Now, in the beginning of the novella, we see that Scrooge lacks this organ, okay, which could be the main reason that he sort of is shown that he dies, okay, by the ghost of Christmas future yet to come. And it's this idea that the ghosts are there in the novella as constructs to build and highlight the need for this organ for Scrooge. And then obviously that a wider message for Dickens and his audience is that they need to build and construct their own organ which functions well in society. Okay, whether it's breaking down your ignorance, whether it's becoming more charitable, becoming more empathetic, that is what Dickens is trying to highlight is fundamental within society. I would then look at how Fezziwig is the direct opposite to Scrooge, okay, as a business owner, as an employer, okay, as a manager. So Fezziwig says, no more work tonight, Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer, let's have the shutters up. Okay, so we see here that Fezziwig directly contrasts Scrooge's attitudes towards business and ethics. Okay, Fezziwig is a capitalist, he's a business owner, okay, and he creates profit. Dickens uses his character, however, to show how this attitude is not detrimental to society if it's balanced with kindness, empathy, and generosity. Okay, Dickens doesn't use the novella to just completely critique capitalism. Okay, he understands that capitalism takes place within society, but what he feels corrupts society is that idea that capitalists go hand in hand with ignorance and arrogance and exploitation. Okay, and what Scrooge is using Fezziwig to highlight is that importance of empathy, okay, for a business owner, and that the making of profit doesn't need to detract from you being a moral human being. Love this next part of Fezziwig's description by Dickens. The first little extract is taken from the moment that Mr. Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig join together and they're dancing in front of the crowd of the party. Okay, and what is really lovely is that Mrs. Fezziwig is described as being worthy to be Fezziwig's partner in every sense of the word. Now, the noun partner highlights how Fezziwig is not only benevolent within his money transactions and his business, but he's also respectful within his marriage. okay, which is a direct contrast to Scrooge's apparent treatment of Belle, who states to Scrooge that she feels overlooked within their relationship when she says, a golden idol has displaced me. Okay, she feels that Scrooge's focus on the creation of profit means that it causes the breakdown of their relationship. Whereas what we see with Fezziwig is, Dickens is giving us evidence of what it looks like to be a model citizen within society, someone who is fully functioning within society. They create profit, they create employment, and they're also kind and empathetic alongside that. Okay, and we see this importance and this focus on loving relationships within the novella. Okay, so we not only see it between Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig, but we see it between Bob and Mrs. Cratchit. Okay, again, this idea that people should work in unity together in order to create this really positive moral society. We then get a lovely description of Fezziwig when he is dancing, and Dickens describes a positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. Okay, now what we see here is Dickens's fundamental belief that if the ruling classes and those who are wealthy enough behaved with kindness and generosity, society would be a better place. Okay, we've got again that imagery of light. So we've got that extension from Fred, whose eyes sparkled and he was all in a glow. We've got Fezziwig's calves glowing, and Dickens is using Fezziwig as a shining example of what Dickens deems as a beacon of hope within society. Furthermore, moons are symbolic within literature of enlightenment and immortality. Okay, so we can see this idea that again, Scrooge is being guided through these visions the ghosts are exposing him towards that path of enlightenment, towards that path of being fundamentally a better human being. And what's interesting is that sort of reference of immortality. It's this idea that Dickens is using this novella to create or encourage a society that will be ongoing and sort of will learn lessons into the future. I would then, this is one of my favourite quotations for Fezziwig, and it's something that I often refer to. So when the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Okay, so it's the time when everyone's leaving, all their guests are leaving, and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took to their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. Now what we have here is a really lovely description of Fezziwig as Dickens uses him to represent a set of public values and attitudes that was deteriorating in the economic turmoil of the 19th century. And what I mean here is that Dickens was seeing in society that the focus became from capitalist members of society, the focus became on making profit, okay, and it then therefore enhanced neglect and the exploitation of the working classes. Okay, so these business owners were actively seeking profit and therefore exploiting their workers in order to create that profit and neglecting them on a personal level as well. And what I love here is, firstly, the noun stations. Okay, it's this idea that this is a really important moment of the evening where Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig feel it's very important to dismiss each guest individually. Okay, and the adverb individually is just beautiful in the sense that we really see the Fezziwigs taking the time to acknowledge each member of society. Now, what might seem as a really small and irrelevant gesture is what Dickens is acting as this sort of lubricant within society. This small, simple gesture will abolish the ignorance and neglect that the working and lower classes faced within employment. And it's really important to remember the guests that are here at the party, okay? We have got the housemaid who comes in with her cousin, the baker, who that also comes in is the cook, okay? And the cook has their brother's particular friend, the milkman. So these are key fundamental people in society, okay? They are working class members of society, and we can see that Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig have taken their time, shared their wealth in order to make these people feel important and recognised. And in this moment, okay, the Fezziwigs are open-hearted, and this party excludes any ignorance that exists within society, okay? It's an utter celebration of kindness. Today, we're going to look at the interaction between the ghost and Scrooge in reaction to what he's just witnessed, okay? And the sort of the memories that were created. So the ghost says that it's a small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude, and Scrooge says small, with the exclamatory there, and the spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices, okay? And what we see here is that Scrooge is heated by the ghost's comments, okay? And he speaks unconsciously like his former, not latter self, okay? So we've got this complete insight into the person that Scrooge could be, okay? He is not fully transformed yet, but we are seeing glimpses of the potential of Scrooge's journey. And I love that reference, okay? He's heated by the remark. Literally, he means heated. He's angry, he's appalled at what the ghost is saying, but symbolically, we can see that the exposure of Fezziwig's influence is a catalyst, so it speeds up Scrooge's journey of change and redemption, okay? And we can also see the direct contrast between Scrooge's introduction to us as carrying his own low temperature and the frosty rime upon his head, and we could see that the Fezziwig is having a positive influence over Scrooge. This scene has ignited a spark within Scrooge, as he genuinely seems to see the value in Fezziwig's generosity. A really nice link that you could make here is this idea that we've got that spark. Now, in Scrooge's introduction, he's described as being solitary as an oyster and hard and sharp as flint. Both of those quotations are hinting to the reader that Scrooge has some form of potential, okay? That underneath Scrooge's miserly and cruel exterior, he has something precious within him, and that capacity to change, okay? And that spark in this moment is ignited by Fezziwig. We then have a really, thoughtful comment from Scrooge, a comment that would almost be shocking to the reader, because this is the first insight into Scrooge being an empathetic human being, okay? And he says to the spirit, it isn't that spirit, he has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil, okay? Now we've got this paradox, okay, so contrast of personalities being described here, okay? The happy is the description of Fezziwig and his power. We've got the unhappy, which is obviously the power that Scrooge has had over Bob. We've got the idea that to make our service light, so we've got Fezziwig closing early for the evening, celebrating with a party, or you've got burdensome, where Bob's forced into a dismal little cell and he's warming himself by a candle and he's got one coal, okay? And then we've got this idea, it's a pleasure or a toil, okay? And what is clear, okay, is how the two characters can either influence others in a positive or a negative way. Fezziwig's character is thoroughly, so through and through, benevolent, therefore having a positive influence on others. And what Dickens is highlighting here is the importance of human empathy. We can see that because of Fezziwig's inherent benevolence, it's actually having a direct impact on Scrooge, okay, in this moment. And we can really see that Scrooge's transformation is starting very slowly to take place.